Blood stained the dirt as Felicity Lawson stumbled into Oroville, California, her torn dress fluttering in the evening breeze like a surrender flag. It was 1871, and the gold rush town had seen its share of desperate souls, but none quite like the woman with haunted eyes who collapsed at the steps of the Miners' Rest Saloon. "Help me," she whispered to the first person who approached, a barmaid whose painted face couldn't mask her concern. "They're coming." Word spread through Oroville like wildfire. A strange woman had arrived, running from something or someone. By nightfall, as Felicity huddled in a corner of the saloon's back room nursing a cup of water, the sheriff and several prominent townspeople had gathered at the bar. "Says her name is Felicity Lawson," Sheriff Morgan explained, twirling his mustache nervously. "Claims she escaped from the Donovan gang after they raided her family's homestead near Sacramento." Cornelius Winslow, the town banker, slammed his fist on the bar. "The Donovans. Those killers have a $5,000 bounty on each of their heads. If they track her here, they'll burn Oroville to the ground." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "We've worked too hard rebuilding after that flood last spring," said Mrs. Henderson, the widow who ran the general store. "Can't risk everything for one woman." The saloon owner, a portly man named James O'Malley, nodded gravely. "She needs to be gone by morning. Send her to Marysville or somewhere bigger with a proper jail." Sheriff Morgan sighed, removing his hat. "It's 15 miles to Marysville. Night stage doesn't run until Wednesday." "Then she walks," Winslow said coldly, adjusting his gold pocket watch. "Or we escort her to the town limits. This isn't our problem." In the shadows near the back door, a tall figure straightened. Brock Zimmerman had been nursing a whiskey, listening quietly as the town decided the fate of a woman they'd never met. His spurs clinked softly as he stepped into the lamplight, the silver star on his chest catching the glow. He wasn't Oroville's sheriff, just a U.S. Marshal passing through on his way north, tracking a counterfeiter. But the badge carried weight, as did the twin Colts at his hips and the reputation that preceded him. "The lady stays," he said, his voice low but carrying across the now silent room. Winslow scoffed. "This isn't your jurisdiction, Marshal. Our town, our decision." Brock's weathered face remained impassive. "She's under my protection now." The words hung in the air, a challenge no one seemed eager to accept. At 32, Brock Zimmerman had earned his reputation the hard way, 12 years of hunting the worst criminals across the Western Territories. The long scar that ran from his right temple to his jaw told part of that story. "Marshal," Sheriff Morgan began carefully, "we're just simple folk trying to protect our homes." "And I'm just a man upholding the law," Brock replied evenly. "Last I checked, turning away someone in need isn't legal or decent." Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "What do you propose, then? That we all risk our lives for this stranger?" Brock's gaze swept across the room. "I propose you act like the God-fearing people you claim to be. I'll handle the Donovans if they show up." "One man against a gang," O'Malley laughed nervously. "Even you can't. I've sent 4 of them to the gallows already," Brock interrupted. "Been hunting them for years. If they're after her, then she just became my most valuable witness." The atmosphere in the room shifted. What had seemed like a simple problem now revealed itself as something more complicated. 2 days, Brock continued. "Give me 2 days to get reinforcements here from Sacramento. Then if you still want her gone, I won't stand in your way." Sheriff Morgan glanced at the town's leading citizens, then nodded slowly. 2 days, Marshal, but she's your responsibility." Brock tipped his hat. Always intended her to be. When the impromptu town meeting dispersed, Brock made his way to the back room where Felicity was being kept. The barmaid sat with her, dabbing at a cut on the woman's forehead. Up close, Brock could see that Felicity Lawson was young, perhaps 24 or 25, with copper-colored hair and eyes the shade of summer sage. Despite the dirt and blood, there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself. "Miss Lawson," he said, removing his hat. "I'm Marshal Brock Zimmerman." Her eyes darted to his badge, then his face. "They want me gone, don't they?" "They're scared," he replied honestly. "But you're not leaving." The barmaid excused herself, leaving them alone in the small room that smelled of tobacco and linen soap. "Why would you help me?" Felicity asked, her voice stronger than he'd expected. "You don't know me." Brock sat on a wooden chair across from her. "I know the Donovans. If they're after you, I want to know why." Felicity's hands trembled slightly. "They killed my father and brother, burned our farm. I saw their faces, all of them." "Which ones?" "Patrick Donovan himself. His brother Sean, a man with a gold tooth they called Rattler. And two others, one with a burned scar on his neck and a younger one, barely more than a boy." Brock nodded slowly. "That would be Patrick, Sean, William Rattler Hayes, Joseph Miller, and probably young Danny Donovan, their cousin." He studied her carefully. "Why your family?" Felicity looked away. "My father was testifying against them in a land dispute. He had documents proving they'd forged deeds to 3 properties near the American River. Those documents are sewn into my petticoat," she finished. "Father made me memorize the contents too, in case they were destroyed." For the first time that evening, Brock smiled. It transformed his hard features, softening the lines around his eyes. "Miss Lawson, you may have just given me the key to bringing down the entire Donovan operation. Then you'll help me." "I'll do more than that," he promised. "I'll make sure justice is served." As dawn broke over Oroville the next morning, Brock stood on the porch of the sheriff's office, surveying the town. The mining community had sprung up during the gold rush and managed to survive when many others had become ghost towns. The buildings were a mix of wooden structures and a few brick establishments along the main street. The morning stage was being prepared at the Wells Fargo office, and shopkeepers were sweeping their porches. Sheriff Morgan joined him, offering a cup of coffee. "She spent the night in the cells." "Figured it was safest." Brock nodded. "Smart. Any word on the telegraph to Sacramento, sent it last night, should hear back today." Morgan hesitated. "Folks are still uneasy, Marshal. They'll be a lot more uneasy if the Donovans ride in and find we turned away their witness." Inside the jailhouse, Felicity was awake, sitting on the edge of the simple cot. Someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, despite her protests, had provided a clean dress and some basic toiletries. Her hair was neatly braided, and most of the dirt had been washed away. The transformation was striking. "Morning, Miss Lawson," Brock said, unlocking the cell. "Hope you got some rest." "More than I expected," she admitted, standing. The dress was slightly too large, but far better than her torn garments from the previous day. "What happens now?" "First, breakfast. Then we need to get those documents somewhere safe." They walked to the small hotel dining room, where several townspeople fell silent as they entered. Brock guided Felicity to a corner table, positioning himself with his back to the wall, a habit formed over years of watching for trouble. As they ate, Felicity studied the marshal. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, his face too weathered, his nose broken at least once, but there was something compelling about him. His dark hair had flecks of gray at the temples, and his eyes, a deep blue, missed nothing. "How long have you been hunting the Donovans?" she asked. "Since they murdered a young deputy and his wife in Montana Territory, 1866, Brock replied, his voice matter of fact. "They've left a trail of bodies across 5 states and territories since then." "And you've followed them all that time?" He nodded. "When I could. Other cases pulled me away sometimes, but I always pick up their trail again. Seems like a lonely way to live. Something flickered in his eyes. Justice isn't always convenient, Miss Lawson. Felicity, she corrected. If you're protecting me with your life, you might as well use my name. The ghost of a smile touched his lips. Felicity, then. Their conversation was interrupted by Sheriff Morgan hurrying into the hotel, his face grim. Marshal, just got word from a farmer outside town. 5 riders were seen heading this way from the south. Description matches the Donovans. Brock stood immediately. How far? Maybe 2 hours if they keep the same pace. They found me, Felicity whispered, her face paling. How could they have tracked me so quickly? Doesn't matter now, Brock said. We need to secure the town. He turned to Morgan. Get every man who can handle a rifle. Station them at key points: the church tower, the mercantile roof, the mining office. The sheriff nodded. What about the women and children? The mine shafts. They're the most defensible position if things go bad. Brock looked at Felicity. And I need those documents. Now. Within the hour, Oroville had transformed. Children were being led to the mine entrances at the edge of town, escorted by several elderly men with shotguns. Shopkeepers barricaded windows, and the few men with military experience organized defensive positions. In the sheriff's office, Felicity handed over the carefully wrapped documents she had extracted from her petticoat. This is everything? Brock asked, examining the papers. Yes. Land deeds, survey maps, and notarized statements from 2 county officials who were later found dead. Brock whistled softly. This is why they're desperate to find you. With these and your testimony, they'd hang for sure. Marshal, Morgan interrupted, telegraph came back from Sacramento. They're sending reinforcements, but they won't arrive until tomorrow at earliest. Brock's expression hardened. Then we hold until tomorrow. He turned to Felicity. I need to get you somewhere safe. I can shoot, she said firmly. My father taught both his children equally. It's not about your abilities, Brock replied. It's about keeping you alive as a witness. Morgan cleared his throat. The old mining office has a hidden cellar. Used to store gold before shipment. Only a few people know about it. Perfect, Brock nodded. We'll move her there with supplies. And Morgan, select your 3 best men. I want them guarding that building, but not obviously so. As they prepared to move Felicity to the hiding place, Brock pulled her aside. Once you're secure, I need you to stay put no matter what happens, no matter what you hear. She met his gaze steadily. And if you don't come back, there's a tunnel that leads from the cellar to the creek bed. Use it only as a last resort. The mining office was a solid brick building that had once been the headquarters of the Oroville Consolidated Mining Company. Now it served mainly as a record office for claim filings. The hidden cellar was accessed through a trapdoor beneath a heavy desk, the entrance cleverly disguised as part of the wooden flooring. No one's used this in years, Morgan explained as they descended the narrow stairs. But it's dry and solid. The cellar was small but well constructed, with stone walls and a packed earth floor. Lanterns illuminated the space, and supplies had already been brought down: water, food, blankets, and a loaded Remington revolver. 3 men will be stationed throughout the building, Brock explained. They'll alert us if anyone approaches. You should be safe here. Felicity nodded, trying to appear braver than she felt. And you'll be where? Wherever the Donovans show up, he replied. His hand briefly touched her shoulder. Stay safe, Felicity. As Brock climbed back up the stairs, Felicity called after him. Marshal, he paused, looking back. Thank you for believing me when no one else would. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding perhaps, or something deeper that neither was ready to name. See you soon, he said simply, and closed the trapdoor. On the main street, Brock coordinated the town's defenses. Despite their initial reluctance, the people of Oroville had rallied. Perhaps it was the realization that the Donovans would show no mercy regardless of whether Felicity remained or not. Or maybe it was Brock's quiet confidence that had inspired them. Whatever the reason, 20 men now stood armed and ready. "They'll likely come in from the South Road," Brock instructed. "But don't discount the possibility they'll split up and approach from multiple directions." Winslow, the banker who had been most vocal about sending Felicity away, now stood grimly holding a shotgun. "For what it's worth, Marshal, I hope you're right about this being worth it. 5 of the worst killers in the territory, Mr. Winslow. Taking them down is always worth it." The wait seemed interminable. The sun climbed higher, baking the dusty streets. Children and most women remained hidden in the mines, while those who stayed behind kept to the shadows of buildings, rifles ready. It was just past noon when a young boy came running from his lookout position at the edge of town. "Riders coming," he shouted. 5 men, just like you said," Brock nodded. "Everyone in position. Remember, I want them alive if possible." The Donovans didn't hurry as they rode into Oroville. They came at a leisurely pace, 5 men on horseback spreading out as they entered the main street. At their head rode Patrick Donovan, a big man with a thick beard and cold eyes. Beside him was his brother Sean, leaner but with the same hard expression. The others matched Felicity's descriptions, perfectly Rattler with his gold tooth gleaming as he grinned, Miller with the burned scar on his neck, and young Danny, barely 20, but with a gun hand that had already claimed several lives. They stopped in the center of town, looking around at the seemingly deserted street. "Bit quiet for midday," Patrick called out loudly. "Almost like you folks were expecting us." Brock stepped out from the shadow of the general store, his badge catching the sunlight. "Patrick Donovan, you and your men are under arrest for murder, arson, robbery, and a dozen other crimes across 3 territories." Patrick's laugh was like gravel. "1 man. That's all they sent." "Oh, I'm not alone," Brock replied calmly. At his signal, the defenders of Oroville revealed themselves from rooftops, windows, and doorways, rifles trained on the 5 outlaws. Patrick's smile faded. "This doesn't concern you folks. We just want the Lawson woman. Hand her over and we'll ride out peaceful-like." "That's not happening," Brock said. "Dismount and drop your weapons." For a long moment no one moved, then Patrick nodded slightly to his men. "Now," Brock shouted, diving for cover as the Donovans went for their guns. The peaceful afternoon erupted into chaos. Gunfire echoed between the buildings as bullets splintered wood and shattered glass. The Donovans scattered, taking cover behind water troughs and hitching posts, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Brock rolled behind a barrel, squeezing off 2 shots that forced Rattler Hayes to duck behind a wagon. From the church tower, one of Morgan's deputies managed to hit Sean Donovan in the shoulder, sending him stumbling into an alleyway. "We got $1,000 for anyone who brings us the Lawson girl," Patrick shouted. "Dead or alive, and the territory's offering $5,000 for each of you," Brock called back, moving to a new position. "Seems like a poor bargain." The firefight intensified. Young Danny Donovan made a dash across the street and was hit in the leg, collapsing with a cry. Miller tried to reach him but was forced back by concentrated fire from the hotel. In the mining office cellar, Felicity listened to the distant gunfire with growing dread. The 3 men guarding the building had moved to defensive positions, leaving her alone with only the sounds of battle filtering down through the floorboards. A sudden crash above made her jump. Footsteps crossed the floor, followed by a voice she recognized with horrifying clarity. "Search everywhere," Sean Donovan ordered. "She's here somewhere. I tracked her to this town myself." Felicity's hand closed around the Remington. Heart pounding, she backed toward the far wall where the tunnel entrance was located. The trapdoor remained hidden beneath the heavy desk, but if they moved it, more footsteps than a grunt of pain. Sean's wounded shoulder must be troubling him. "Boss said to burn the place if we have to," another voice said. "Miller," she realized. "No witnesses." "Not yet," Sean replied. "Find her first." Felicity held her breath as furniture was overturned and drawers emptied. The desk above the trapdoor scraped across the floor as it was shoved aside. "What's this?" Miller said. The trapdoor lifted. Felicity fired twice, the shots deafening in the confined space. Miller fell backward with a scream. Sean returned fire blindly, bullets embedding in the wall behind her as she scrambled toward the tunnel entrance. "She's here," Sean shouted, presumably to alert others. "The cellar." Felicity pushed through the small wooden door that concealed the tunnel and plunged into darkness. Behind her, she heard Sean descending the cellar stairs, cursing his injured shoulder. The tunnel was low and narrow, forcing her to crouch as she ran. Roots hung from the ceiling, and the earthen walls pressed in on both sides. Her only guidance was the faint light from the cellar behind her and the slight downward slope leading toward the creek. She had gone perhaps 50 yards when she heard Sean enter the tunnel behind her, his labored breathing echoing off the walls. The Remington had only 4 bullets left, and shooting in the confined space was risky. The tunnel began to brighten slightly. Ahead, she could see where it opened onto the creek bed, partially hidden by bushes and rocks. Freedom was just yards away, but so was Sean Donovan. A shot rang out behind her, the bullet striking the tunnel wall in a spray of dirt. Felicity threw herself forward, emerging into the bright afternoon sunlight beside the shallow creek that ran along the edge of town. She scrambled to her feet, looking for cover, but the creek bank offered little protection. Sean would emerge any second, and open ground stretched before her. In desperation, she raised the Remington and aimed at the tunnel entrance. When Sean's head appeared, she squeezed the trigger only to hear the sickening click of a misfire. Sean grinned, raising his own weapon. A shot cracked through the air. Sean jerked backward, a look of surprise freezing on his face before he collapsed half in, half out of the tunnel. "Felicity." She turned to see Brock rushing toward her, smoke still curling from his Colt. Blood stained his left sleeve, but he moved with determination. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, reaching her side. "No, she gestured toward Sean's body. "He found the cellar. Miller was with him, but I shot him." Brock nodded grimly. "That's 2 down. Patrick and Rattler are still out there." He glanced around. "We need to get you back to cover." The fights moved to the north end of town. They made their way along the creek bed, using the brush for concealment. Gunfire still echoed sporadically from the direction of the main street. "What happened?" Felicity asked as they crouched behind a fallen tree. "Ambush went south when Patrick recognized the setup," Brock explained. "They're good, I'll give them that. Split up immediately, used the buildings for cover." He winced, adjusting his arm. "Bullet grazed me early on." "Let me see," she insisted, carefully rolling up his sleeve. The wound was bloody but superficial, the bullet having carved a furrow along his upper arm. She tore a strip from her petticoat and bound it tightly. "This will hold until it can be properly treated." Brock watched her efficient movements. "You've done this before." "Farm accidents happen," she replied simply. "And my father believed a woman should know how to tend wounds as well as inflict them." "Wise man." "He was," she said softly, "and he deserves justice." A distant shout drew their attention. From their position, they could see Rattler Hayes running between buildings, pursued by several townsmen. "Stay here," Brock ordered, rising to a crouch. "No," Felicity countered, gripping the Remington. "I'm coming with you. This is my fight, too." He hesitated, then nodded. "Stay behind me." They moved through the edge of town, using back alleys and service passages between buildings. The gunfire had largely ceased, suggesting the battle was winding down or that one side had prevailed. As they approached the livery stable, Sheriff Morgan spotted them and hurried over, his hat gone and a bloody scratch across his forehead. "Marshal, we got Rattler cornered in the stable, but Patrick's holed up in the saloon with Mrs. Henderson as hostage." Brock's expression darkened. "Casualties. 2 of ours dead, Jenkins from the assay office and young Billy Thompson. Several wounded. The boy Danny Donovan's captured and Miller was found dead in the mining office." "Sean's dead too," Brock reported. "That just leaves Patrick and Rattler." Morgan nodded. "What's the plan?" Brock considered for a moment. "I'll handle Patrick and the hostage situation. You keep Rattler contained, but don't rush him. He's too dangerous to take chances with." "And me?" Felicity asked. "You stay with Deputy Wells," Brock said, nodding toward a young man guarding the rear of the general store. "I need you alive to testify." Before she could protest, Brock moved toward the saloon, staying low and using every available bit of cover. The Miners' Rest had thick walls and few windows, a defensive advantage for Patrick Donovan. From inside came a woman's frightened cry, followed by Patrick's voice. "Send in Zimmerman alone. Anyone else tries to enter and the woman dies." Brock paused behind a water trough, considering his options. A direct confrontation was exactly what Patrick wanted, a chance to eliminate the man who'd been hunting him for years. "Marshal," came a whisper from beside him. He turned to find Felicity crouching there, having disobeyed his order to stay back. "I told you I know another way in," she interrupted. "When they brought me here yesterday, I saw a cellar entrance behind the saloon. It might lead inside." Brock's eyes narrowed. "That's too dangerous." "More dangerous than walking through the front door to face a killer," she challenged. "Besides, I memorized the layout when I was inside." After a moment's hesitation, Brock nodded. "Show me." They retreated, circling around to approach the saloon from behind. Sure enough, a slanted cellar door was built into the ground near the back wall. Brock tested it, unlocked. "I'll go first," he whispered. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, get Morgan and storm the place." "Brock," Felicity said, using his first name for the first time. Her hand touched his arm. "Be careful." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Then he slipped through the cellar door into darkness. The cellar was stacked with barrels of beer and whiskey. A narrow wooden staircase led up to a trapdoor in the ceiling, presumably opening into the saloon's back room or kitchen. Brock ascended silently, his Colt ready, and listened at the trapdoor. He could hear Patrick's voice more clearly now, threatening Mrs. Henderson and demanding that Brock show himself. From the sound, they were in the main room of the saloon, near the bar. Carefully, Brock eased the trapdoor open a crack. He could see into a small storeroom, empty of people. Beyond was the main saloon, visible through a partially open door. He slipped through the trapdoor and crossed the storeroom in 3 silent strides. Through the doorway, he could see Patrick Donovan standing behind the bar, one arm wrapped around Mrs. Henderson's throat, the other holding a revolver to her head. The widow's face was tear-streaked but defiant. "1 minute, Zimmerman," Patrick shouted toward the front door. "Then I start shooting fingers off." Brock took a deep breath, then stepped into the doorway, his Colt leveled. "Let her go, Patrick, it's over." Donovan's head whipped around, eyes widening in shock. "How did you? Your brother's dead. So is Miller. Danny's captured and Rattler's surrounded. You've got nowhere to go." Patrick's face contorted with rage. He shoved Mrs. Henderson aside and fired at Brock, who dove behind an overturned table as bullets splintered the wood around him. "You've been hunting me for years," Patrick snarled, moving along the bar for a better angle. "And now I'm going to put you in the ground." "Many have tried," Brock replied calmly, rolling to a new position and firing twice. One bullet struck a bottle behind Patrick, showering him with glass and whiskey. Mrs. Henderson had crawled behind a piano, temporarily out of the line of fire. Patrick, realizing his hostage was gone, abandoned caution and charged Brock's position, firing rapidly. A bullet grazed Brock's cheek as he rose to one knee and fired 3 times in quick succession. Patrick staggered, hit twice in the chest, but kept coming, a wild look in his eyes. His gun clicked empty, but momentum carried him forward, crashing into Brock and sending them both to the floor. Despite his wounds, Patrick fought with desperate strength, hands closing around Brock's throat. Brock struck upward with the butt of his pistol, catching Patrick under the chin. The outlaw's grip loosened momentarily, allowing Brock to throw him off. Both men scrambled to their feet. Patrick drew a knife from his boot, lunging forward with the blade. Brock caught his wrist and they grappled, crashing into tables and chairs. "Should've left it alone," Patrick gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "Was just business." "Murdering innocent people isn't business," Brock growled, forcing the knife hand downward. "It's evil." With a final surge of strength, Brock twisted the knife and drove it into Patrick's side. The outlaw's eyes widened in shock, then dulled as he collapsed to the floor. Breathing heavily, Brock checked for a pulse. Finding none, he rose unsteadily to his feet. "Mrs. Henderson, are you hurt?" The widow emerged from behind the piano, shaken but intact. "I'm all right, Marshal. Thanks to you." Gunfire erupted from the direction of the livery, followed by shouts. Brock staggered to the saloon's entrance, his injuries finally catching up with him. Outside, townspeople were converging on the stable. "Rattler tried to break out," Morgan reported, hurrying over. "He's down." "Dead," Morgan nodded. "Went out shooting. Wouldn't surrender." Brock's gaze swept the street, seeking one person. He found her standing with Deputy Wells, her face lighting up when she saw him alive. Despite his exhaustion and pain, Brock felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "It's over," he said as Felicity reached him. "They're all accounted for." "You're bleeding," she noted, touching his cheek gently. "Worth it," he replied, allowing her to lead him toward the doctor's house. "Your family has justice now." The following days saw Oroville slowly returning to normal. The dead were buried with honors, the wounded tended, and the story of how the town had stood against the Donovan gang spread throughout the territory. Young Danny Donovan was taken to Sacramento to stand trial, where Felicity's testimony and documents ensured he would face justice for his crimes. As promised, reinforcements arrived from Sacramento, a day late, but bringing with them official recognition of Brock's actions and the town's courage. The territorial governor sent a letter of commendation, along with the reward money for the Donovans, which Brock insisted be distributed among the families of the fallen townsmen. On the 3rd evening after the battle, Brock sat on the hotel porch, his arm properly bandaged and his face healing. The setting sun cast long shadows across the street where, just days earlier, blood had been spilled. Felicity joined him, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She had been staying at the hotel, her room paid for by the grateful townspeople who had initially wanted her gone. "The Sacramento Marshal leaves tomorrow," she said, handing him a cup. "He says the paperwork is completed and my testimony is recorded. I'm free to go." Brock nodded, sipping the hot coffee. "Where will you go?" She looked out at the town, considering. "I don't know. The farm is gone. My family is gone." After a pause, she asked, "What about you? Another criminal to chase?" "I've been thinking about that," he said slowly. 12 years of living on the trail, hunting men who need killing or imprisoning. It takes a toll. Are you saying you might quit? He turned to face her. I'm saying maybe it's time to build something instead of just protecting what others have built. The evening breeze played with a loose strand of Felicity's copper hair. What would you build, Marshal Zimmerman? A life, maybe. His blue eyes held hers. Somewhere peaceful. With someone who understands what it means to fight for justice, but also values what comes after the fighting's done. Felicity set her coffee down, her heart beating faster. That sounds like something worth building. It would be, he agreed softly, with the right partner. Is that a proposal, Marshal? She asked, a smile touching her lips. It's a beginning, he replied. If you're willing. In answer, Felicity moved closer, her hand finding his. I think beginnings are my favorite part of any story. Brock's weathered face softened as he leaned toward her. Their kiss was gentle but full of promise, the first chapter of something neither had expected to find in a town that had almost turned them away. 2 weeks later, under a sky painted with sunset colors, Brock and Felicity were married in Oroville's small church. The same townspeople who had once feared her presence now celebrated their union. Sheriff Morgan served as best man, while Mrs. Henderson, fully recovered from her ordeal, stood as matron of honor. Never seen a town change its mind so completely, Brock commented as they greeted well-wishers after the ceremony. People can surprise you, Felicity replied, radiant in a simple white dress. When given the chance to do the right thing, many will rise to the occasion. Banker Winslow approached, hat in hand. Mrs. Zimmerman, Marshal, on behalf of the town council, I'd like to formally offer you the deed to the old Crawford property at the edge of town. It's got good water, 30 acres and a house that needs some work but has solid bones. Brock raised an eyebrow. That's generous, Mr. Winslow. The banker had the grace to look embarrassed. Consider it our apology for how things started and our thanks for how they ended. After Winslow departed, Felicity squeezed Brock's hand. A home of our own. That's a good beginning for building a life. Speaking of building, Brock said, leading her away from the crowd for a moment of privacy. I received a letter from the territorial governor yesterday. He's offered me the position of circuit judge for this region. Felicity's eyes widened. Judge Zimmerman, that has a distinguished ring to it. It means I'd still uphold the law but with less gunfire and more stability. He studied her face. I'd be home most nights. We could put down roots. I think it sounds perfect, she said, her eyes shining. From marshal to judge, you're moving up in the world. I moved up the moment you agreed to marry me, he replied, drawing her close. Everything else is just details. As summer turned to fall, Brock and Felicity settled into their new home and roles. The Crawford property, as Winslow had promised, had good land and a sturdy house that, with work, became a comfortable home. Brock traveled the circuit 3 weeks out of 4, bringing justice to remote communities while building a reputation for fairness and integrity. Felicity, meanwhile, established a small school in their home, teaching the children of miners and farmers who had little access to education. On crisp October evenings, they would sit on their porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Sometimes Sheriff Morgan would ride out to share news or a glass of whiskey. Other times, they simply enjoyed each other's company, marveling at how circumstances had brought them together. You ever think about that first night? Felicity asked one evening as they sat wrapped in a quilt against the autumn chill. When the town wanted me gone, Brock's arm tightened around her shoulders. I think about how close I came to riding past Oroville completely. One day's difference and we might never have met. I believe we would have found each other somehow, she said, resting her head against his shoulder. Some things are meant to be. Never took you for a romantic, Judge Zimmerman, he teased gently. I wasn't, she admitted, until I found something worth believing in. Winter brought heavy snows to the Sierra foothills, making travel difficult. Brock's circuit duties were temporarily suspended, giving the couple unexpected time together. They spent the cold months making improvements to their home, reading aloud by the fire and planning for the future. In early spring, as the first wildflowers pushed through the melting snow, Felicity shared news that brought tears to Brock's eyes. "A baby," he whispered, hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "Are you certain?" She nodded, her own eyes moist. "Dr. Matthews confirmed it yesterday. By autumn, we'll be 3 instead of 2. Brock pulled her into a gentle embrace. "I never thought I'd have this: a wife, a child, a home, after so many years of just surviving, of chasing others. You deserved this happiness all along," she told him. "Sometimes it just takes time to find our way home." Word of their impending parenthood spread through Oroville, bringing a steady stream of visitors bearing gifts and advice. Mrs. Henderson appointed herself unofficial guardian of Felicity's health, bringing special teas and insisting on regular rest periods. Sheriff Morgan and his deputies helped Brock construct a nursery addition to their home, working through several weekends to ensure it would be ready well before the birth. As summer bloomed across the valley, Felicity's condition became more pronounced. She continued teaching until the heat made it impractical, then focused on preparing for their child's arrival. Brock, resuming his circuit duties, arranged his schedule to be home more frequently, unwilling to miss any significant moments. On a warm September evening, with a harvest moon hanging low in the sky, their son was born. They named him Frederick Morgan Zimmerman, Frederick for Felicity's father, and Morgan for the sheriff, who had become their closest friend. "He has your eyes," Felicity murmured as they gazed at their newborn son, his tiny hand wrapped around Brock's finger. "And your determination," Brock replied, noting the strength of the baby's grip. "He'll be a force to reckon with." Life settled into a new rhythm with Frederick's arrival. Brock's duties as circuit judge continued, but he negotiated adjustments that allowed him more time at home. Felicity resumed teaching the following spring, with Frederick napping in a cradle beside her desk as she instructed the local children. Their home became a gathering place for the community, a symbol of how Oroville had transformed from a town that once feared outsiders to one that embraced the family, whose story had become intertwined with its own. On Frederick's first birthday, as friends and neighbors gathered to celebrate, Sheriff Morgan raised a toast. "To the Zimmermans," he declared, "who remind us that sometimes the greatest acts of courage aren't facing down outlaws, but opening our doors and hearts to those in need." Brock, standing with his arm around Felicity and their son balanced on his hip, surveyed the faces of those who had become their extended family. "2 years ago, this town wanted her gone before morning," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "I said she was under my protection." He smiled down at his wife. "Best decision I ever made." Felicity's eyes sparkled as she stretched up to kiss him. "For both of us," she whispered. As the years passed, their family grew. Frederick was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, 2 years later, and eventually by another brother, Samuel. The Zimmerman home expanded accordingly, with Brock adding rooms and outbuildings as needed. Their land flourished under Felicity's careful management, producing bountiful gardens and orchards that supplemented the family's income from Brock's judgeship and Felicity's teaching. By the time Frederick was 10, the small school in their home had grown into a proper schoolhouse in town, with Felicity serving as headmistress. Her reputation as an educator spread throughout the region, attracting families who valued learning for their children. Brock, now in his 50s with silver threading through his dark hair, had become one of the most respected judicial figures in the territory. His fair rulings and commitment to justice earned him consideration for the territorial Supreme Court, an honor he ultimately declined, unwilling to relocate his family from the home they had built together. "Some might call that foolish," Felicity remarked when he shared his decision to remain in Oroville. "It's a prestigious position." "I spent half my life chasing after things," he replied, watching their children play in the yard with the family dog. "Now I know what matters most is right here." On their 15th wedding anniversary, the town of Oroville held a celebration in their honor. The main street was decorated with banners and lanterns, and tables laden with food stretched from the church to the courthouse. Music and laughter filled the air as residents, old and new, gathered to recognize the couple who had become integral to the community's identity. Mayor Thornton, Winslow having retired years earlier, presented them with a leather-bound chronicle of Oroville's history, their story prominently featured. "You turned our darkest hour into our proudest legacy," he told them. "This town stands taller because of what you taught us about courage and compassion." Later that night, as they walked home under a canopy of stars, Felicity's hand clasped in his, Brock reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. "Funny how life works," he mused. "I spent years tracking killers across wilderness, always moving, never staying long enough to know a place or its people. Now I can't imagine being anywhere but here." "You ever miss it?" Felicity asked. "The adventure of those days." Brock considered the question seriously. "Sometimes I miss the clarity of it, knowing exactly who the enemy was, what needed to be done. Life's more complicated now." He smiled down at her. "But infinitely better." As they approached their home, lights glowing in the windows and their oldest son waiting on the porch to greet them, Brock stopped and turned to his wife. The years had touched them both, lines around her eyes, strands of gray in her copper hair, but to him, she remained as beautiful as the day he'd first seen her in the Miners' Rest saloon. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For being worth protecting. For giving me something to build, not just something to defend." He cupped her face gently. "For making a life with me when you could have gone anywhere after the Donovans were gone." Felicity leaned into his touch. "There was never anywhere else I wanted to go, not after I found you." Their kiss, witnessed only by the stars and their waiting sun, held all the tenderness and passion of their first embrace and all the depth of the years they had shared. Frederick, now a lanky youth with his father's blue eyes and his mother's quiet dignity, smiled as they approached. "Good celebration, the best," Felicity assured him, linking arms with both her men as they walked the final steps to their home. Inside, Elizabeth and Samuel had fallen asleep on the sofa, curled together like puppies. The sight made Brock's heart swell with gratitude for all he had been given: a family, a home, a purpose beyond the violence that had defined his earlier years. As they settled their children into bed and prepared for sleep themselves, Brock found himself thinking of that fateful night when a desperate woman had stumbled into Oroville, and a town had been ready to turn her away. One decision, made in an instant, had altered the course of countless lives. "No regrets?" he asked as they lay together in the darkness. Felicity's hand found his. "Not one," she whispered. "Every step led us here. How could I regret any of it?" In the years that followed, Oroville continued to grow and prosper, as did the Zimmerman family. Frederick followed in his father's footsteps, studying law and eventually becoming a lawyer who advocated for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Elizabeth discovered a talent for medicine, training with Dr. Matthews before attending medical school in San Francisco. Samuel, the youngest, inherited his mother's love of learning and became a teacher in the school she had founded. Brock and Felicity watched with pride as their children built their own lives, some staying near Oroville, others venturing further afield but always returning home for important occasions. In their later years, as Brock's health began to decline, they spent peaceful days on the porch of the home they had shared for decades, watching grandchildren play in the same yard where their own children had once romped. "We've been blessed," Brock observed one golden afternoon as they sat hand in hand, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. "More than most," Felicity agreed, her voice still strong though her body had grown frail. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night? When the town wanted me gone. That you were under my protection," Brock recalled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Felicity squeezed his hand. "What you may not know is that from that moment, you were under mine as well." When Brock passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, the entire territory mourned. His funeral procession stretched from the church to the cemetery, with people traveling from towns throughout the circuit he had served to pay their respects. Felicity, surrounded by children and grandchildren, stood tall as she received condolences from hundreds whose lives had been touched by the man who had spent his life in service to justice and family. She lived 5 more years without him, continuing to be a guiding presence in the community and a beloved matriarch to her expanding family. On quiet evenings, neighbors would sometimes see her sitting alone on the porch, gazing toward the mountains as if looking for someone in the distance. When her time came, she went as peacefully as her husband had, a smile on her face as if greeting someone long awaited. They were laid to rest side by side in Oroville's cemetery, beneath a simple headstone that bore their names, dates, and a single line that summed up the legacy they had built together. They taught us that protection becomes love, and love becomes home. The story of Brock and Felicity Zimmerman, of a town that wanted her gone before morning, and a cowboy who declared her under his protection, became part of Oroville's identity, passed down through generations. Their home was preserved as a historical landmark, and the school Felicity founded continued to educate the children and grandchildren of those who had once stood against the Donovan gang. In time, as the frontier gave way to civilization, and the Wild West became more legend than reality, their story remained a testament to how courage and compassion could transform not just 2 lives, but an entire community. It served as a reminder that sometimes the most important journeys begin with a single act of protection, and the most enduring legacies are built on foundations of love.